Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You're listening to the What's Happening Muslim show brought to you by the Islamic Vibes podcast, and I'm your host Majid. Before we get into the podcast, I'd like to say that if you find our content beneficial, please share it with your family and friends. And it goes without saying, please don't forget to subscribe and follow the Islamic Vibes podcast. Okay, on to today's show. I'm joined by my co-hosts Rash, Afi, and the return of the Mac, brother JK. Assalamu alaikum, brothers.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I sort of like pointed out JK there because it does feel like an eternity since we last had him on the show.
Yeah, it's been a while. But I'm sure you guys have been delivering some good podcasts. So I'm sure I haven't been missed too much.
Well, you say you're sure, but I hope you're listening to them.
Of course, I'm listening
if you
to them.
Listen to them, then you're gonna say, "Yeah, you guys have been recording some banging podcasts."
No, you have been.
You know, I've been dying to get back on. You've not been giving me a slot.
No, it's probably more down to me than not being on. But no, alhamdulillah, it's good to be back.
No, it's good to have you on, bro. It's good to have you on. Afi, Rash, everything well with you, brothers?
Yeah, everything's good. I actually listened to the one you did last week with Dr. Yaqub. I thought that was excellent. Yeah, you know, especially I was saying to you the other day, especially second half of the podcast. So anybody who's listening, persevere with it, because second half, Dr. Yaqub comes out with some excellent points about the Ottoman state. I really enjoyed it and took quite a lot from it. So yeah, that's certainly something I've done this week.
Yeah, no, jazakallah for that, bro. To be honest with you, it feels like an age recording another What's Happening show, because I actually recorded the Dr. Yaqub one before we did our last show.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. I didn't realize. Okay.
So it seems like it has been almost 2 weeks since we've done one of these. But yeah, definitely, guys, some kind words from Rash there, but he is right. It was a good podcast. Dr. Yaqub really, his insight into the Ottoman history is amazing. So definitely check out episode 35, the last episode called Were the Ottomans Islamic? So a nice plug in there, Rash, jazakallah for that reminder. Okay, so let's get on to this show. Okay, brothers. Now, it's going to be an interesting one. As we know, there have been reports in Saudi Arabia that Saudi Arabia has banned the Tablighi Jamaat over concerns that it poses a danger to society. Now, it's important that I add here that there is a bit of a dispute actually regarding whether the Saudis have actually banned the Tablighi Jamaat now, or whether it's already been banned decades ago. And I personally believe that it's already been banned a while back. However, what we see, and probably we're definitely going to touch upon on this, that the Indian media sort of latched onto the story big time and start promoting that the Tabligh Jamaat had just been banned by Saudi Arabia recently, right? But what we do know as a matter of fact is that in Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia basically issued the topic for Friday's sermons on the 10th of December 2021, not long ago, in which the Tablighi Jamaat and the Dawah group Al-Ahbab was warned against, declaring the misguidance, deviation, and dangers of this group, and calling it one of the gates of terrorism. Now, this is something which definitely happened, and you guys might have seen the tweet by the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, Saudi Arabia, and basically they sent a message out to all because what you got to understand is in majority of the Muslim countries, the Friday khutbah is written by the actual the religious affairs. It's not done by the imam, the khatibs. It basically they get in a written khutbah which they have to deliver. So basically, what the Saudi government, the ministry, the Islamic ministry wanted the sermons to be about were 4 points. The first one was the declaration of the misguidance, deviation, and danger of this group, and that it is one of the gates of terrorism, even if they claim otherwise. Point 2 was was for them to mention their most prominent mistakes. Point 3 was to mention their dangers to society. And point 4 was the statement that affiliation with partisan groups including the Tablighi Jamaat and the Dawah group, is prohibited in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So it seems like they were actually reminding people that these groups have been banned already, right? Now, what we saw from this is that the BJP-led government in India and the illegal Zionist entity in occupied Palestine, they rejoiced at this news, especially the BJP, right, whose leader and the country's health minister, Mangal Pandey, not to be confused with Amir Khan in the movie Mangal Pandey. This is the health minister. He was quoted by India's ANI news agency as saying, "We've seen proof of Pakistan's involvement in guarding and promoting terrorism. For world peace, we've to break all the organizations related to terrorism. So we'll welcome if any country tries to eliminate it." And also the working president of the VHP, one of the hardcore Hindutva groups in India, Alok Kumar, he demanded that the Tablighi Jamaat also be banned in India. Now, very quickly before I bring you guys in, I think it's important to maybe give a bit of background about the Tablighi Jamaat, because some people may not have heard about them. Okay, so the Tablighi Jamaat is described as a transnational Sunni Islamic missionary movement that focuses on exhorting Muslims and encouraging fellow members to return to practicing their religion as per the Islamic Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. However, they stress only in matters of ritual, dress, and personal behavior. The Tablighi Jamaat was established in 1926 or 1927 by the Sufi Muhammad Ilyas al-Kandhlawi of Chisti Tariqa in the Mewat region of India. His famous slogan used to be, "E Muslimano, Musliman bano," which is, "O Muslims, become true Muslims." Tablighi Jamaat is a very important point, denies any affiliation to politics, right? The Tablighi Jamaat's aversion to politics and its lack of any direct and practical economic, political, social viewpoints, like, for example, the occupation in Palestine, has helped it enter and operate in societies, especially Western countries and societies where politically active religious groups face restrictions. I'm just going to mention just a couple of quotes just to give you an idea of what other people in the West think of Tablighi Jamaat. So there's a guy called Graham E. Fuller, a former CIA official. He said Tablighi Jamaat is a peaceful and apolitical preaching to the people movement. Olivia Roy said that it's completely apolitical and law-abiding. And Barbara D. Metcalf from the University of Michigan said that it's an apolitical, quietist movement of internal grassroots missionary renewal. However, there have been some claims that Islamic extremism and Islamist extremism and Islamist extremists can be linked to Tablighi Jamaat, which I'm sure we're going to discuss later, right? And from my personal experience, and definitely I know you guys would have experienced it with followers of the Tablighi Jamaat, we have many live in our locality. What's normally commonly known is that they're not really political and they're not really linked to any sort of extremism or terrorism, right? This is even from personal experience, which makes you wonder why the group is feeling the recent heat and why it's been banned, or at least is being targeted in Saudi Arabia. So, brothers, what's your thought on this? And also, what do you think about the BJP and the Zionist entity also rejoicing at this news? Rash, purely because you're not on mute, I'll start off with you, bro.
No, Jazakallah. Yeah, no, originally I was a little bit surprised as well, but I think that's just like, the emotional, just when you read the headline first and foremost, you think, hey, what's going on here? Like you said, they're very apolitical, they're not into politics at all. We've all come across people from Tabligh where, we've been to mosques and they've just tried to ask us to travel with them, learn about Islam with them. And we've also seen that they actually target more often than not less practicing Muslims. And, people, they just want to get back onto the practicing side. So when you hear that, knowing what the Saudis are like, when you hear them clamping down, you tend to compare that with when they clamp down on scholars. So, when Saudi clamps down on someone, it tends to be because it's trying to go against what they're trying to promote. So, for instance, like, when there are scholars talking about the implementation of Islam, or there are scholars talking about how the Saudi regime are doing things against the Sunnah and doing things like, like these concerts and things, you see these scholars get thrown into prison. So you'd think that Tablighi Jamaat were doing things of that nature for them to get kind of similar treatment in terms of being banned. So that's why it's initially surprising as to why they see that Tablighi Jamaat as a threat. However, my first point, a couple of points on it, and then obviously the brothers should add, is this is where I think if we think like that, it's probably a little bit naive, because to think like that is just to say that, grassroots kind of dawah is not a threat, and only political, dawah, which is political in nature, is a threat. But I think the likes of Saudi Arabia and, their masters in the White House, they understand that grass level dawah, awakening Muslims to getting closer to Islam, even if it is a bit ascetic type Islam, a bit insular, a bit, restricted to the mosque, restricted to the homes, I think they still see that as a threat, because that leads to people becoming more Islamic, people wanting to learn more about Islam, and then people wanting to know how Islam can solve problems for me, so it falls into that, was it Tony Blair, was it Blair or Cameron who mentioned the conveyor belt theory?
What do you mean Blair, I think?
Blair, either one of them, they talked about the conveyor belt theory, and the conveyor belt theory is that you start your Islamic journey somewhere, and then it leads towards you becoming more extreme and more radical, more tradition, fundamentalist and more radical, etc. So I think that's where part of it comes. I think there's other arguments about Wahhabism versus, the Tablighi Jamaat approach. We should discuss that as well. But initially, after why are they doing that? Surely TJ aren't a threat to them. But then when you think about it, you go, actually, if the US, who did like a study in 2006, if the US thought it relevant to study this group and see what they're doing grassroots and, be wary of them, then I'm not surprised that Saudi Arabia, a country which is so oppressive, who wants everything done in their way, I'm not surprised that they've clamped down on it. In terms of the India one, maybe let's break this bit down first and understand it, and then let's talk about, how the likes of Israel and India and BJP have kind of taken advantage of the situation.
No, Jazakallah, bro. Some good points there. JK?
Yeah, no, just to build on what Rashid's saying, totally agree. I think if you think about the Saudi regime, they will ban any group or movement that is contrary to their view of Islam and what they view to be, to continue their dominance as being a kingdom and being an authority over the blessed lands, the land of Mecca, Medina, the blessed lands of Islam. And hence why they've banned Tablighi Jamaat. But previously, they've also banned groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in 2014. Both Saudi and UAE, they officially designated MB, Muslim Brotherhood, as a terrorist organization. So this shows that whatever the group may be, however political, so Muslim Brotherhood, we know, is quite political. They partake in the political system. They call out the regimes and they want to change the authority. Tablighi Jamaat, they do much less than that. In fact, there's certain concepts that the Tablighi Jamaat actually, water down. So even jihad, they, just going on Jama'ah with them is they compare to jihad. You're going on the path of Allah. But actually, we know this is, they take out the military aspect of jihad and dawah. So they've watered down elements, and this is their main criticism, to be fair. In terms of mainstream Islam, mainstream Muslims, Tablighi Jamaat do have some criticisms that Muslims put out their door, and this is the main one, that they've actually reduced Islam to being very apolitical and something that can, work in a Western society as well. So I think in terms of your question about why Saudi are doing this, I agree with what Rash is saying, that any movement that is Islamic in nature, whether it's political or not, the Saudi regime will have a problem with. Even certain scholars that they've put in jail, they haven't been massively political. They're not, they're not calling for the end of the Saudi regime, but anyone that falls out of line in this new vision for Saudi, which is Vision 2030, they are being designated as either, terrorists or groups that need to be banned. And that's because Saudi Arabia is moving in a certain direction. They're moving towards liberalization, westernization of that Islamic land. So, the reasons they've called Tablighi Jamaat out and banned them is on the lines of every argument they make of bid'ah, shirk, these groups are not in line with true Islam. But the hypocrisy is that this is the same regime who has started many initiatives in the blessed land. You have the Riyadh season 2021, you have the Red Sea Film Festival in Jeddah from 2019, and it's going to be an annual event where they're inviting various artists from the Western world, from the most immoral artists that you can think of, they're inviting to the blessed land. So on one hand, and they've got thousands and thousands of events that are happening, concerts, hundreds of thousands of people attending these events. So on one hand, you see them using this argument of bid'ah, shirk against the Tablighi Jamaat, but on the other hand, they're doing actions like this that are surely not from Islam. So my real reasoning here is that Saudi is making a shift towards liberalism and westernization, and they are basically targeting any group or movement that is at odds with this. Because Tablighi Jamaat, they don't agree with this, they will call this out as well. And then that puts into question any group. So if they can ban a group that is apolitical, one who has no threat to their dominance or authority, then they can call out any group. Because if this is the bar is set very low. Any other group that has an element of politics or even just Islam is now at threat of being banned by the Saudi regime. And just to kind of move on to that question that you posed around the BJP and Israel, or the Zionist entity, the occupiers, praising the actions of Saudi, it really highlights the point that to the Muslims, the BJP and the Zionist regime are enemies. They're clear-cut enemies. No one's going to deny that as a Muslim. But your enemies are praising a so-called regime who's meant to be the custodians of the Holy Mosque, meant to be representatives of Islam. That tells you all you need to know about the actions and the approach, the vision, the path that the Saudi regime is going down.
Yeah, Jazakallah, man. Afi?
Yeah, I think when it happened, when it was announced, I think there was a little bit of a chuckle out of irony here, in the sense of actually, why the what bit isn't surprising, because the what bit is a joke. Because everything that they've claimed about the Tablighi Jamaat, every Muslim will know that this is ludicrous when you're talking about the most pacifist group of people amongst us, right? And you're trying to label them with as extremists and linking to terrorism. So that bit of it was a joke. So you can ignore that. And I think we're rightly focusing on the why. And the why, I think there's a lot of thoughts, and I think a lot like the brothers have said, I think the why and what really stands out about the Tablighi Jamaat for me is that they're different from a number of other groups within the Muslims, as in, what's different about the Tablighi Jamaat and the Brelvi movement, for example, or the Brelvi group, is in that latter word, or the former word, which is movement. Yeah, the Brelvis are just a group. They're going to keep themselves to themselves. They might do a little bit of dawah to other Muslims and say, come on, believe in our version of it. Whereas the Tablighi Jamaat are actually looking for a change. So they're actually a movement who are seeking a change. We can argue whether the change is comprehensive enough or not. That's a different story, but they're seeking a change. And here is where I think they've specifically been drawn out here, because we know in the Muslim world, and even in the non-Muslim world as well, a certain narrative about what Islam is being portrayed. And that's what they want people to embrace. And when you target certain groups, it's easy to do, because you get the Brelvi movement group to talk about this is our version of Islam, and you distance yourself from everything else. But they're keeping it amongst themselves. They influence their own little group of people. Whereas the Tablighi Jamaat are different, because they're all inclusive. They're not exclusive. Anyone could join the Tablighi Jamaat in the work that they do. You could be of a Brelvi background, you could be of a Salafi background, you could be of a Shia background, as long as you agree with what they're trying to do, which is in essence calling people back to the fundamentals of Islam as they see it. And here lies the problem, because you can't control people who are coming in and out. As a movement, you don't know what the background of people is. You know that it ain't going to be one message. It could be, people of a different background. And you're then influencing the people that you come across, because what is the essence of Tablighi Jamaat? They're going away from home, calling people to their message. And here is where the state apparatus loses control, because how do you control the conversations that are happening with people who you don't control?
Yeah.
And I think for this reason, although the threat of the Tablighi Jamaat isn't what the Saudis claim it is, it makes them lose control. So, what you'll find is actually the Saudis aren't the first people to ban them. Yet Uzbekistan has banned them, Kyrgyzstan has banned them, Russia has banned them. And when do they ban? They ban them when they see them getting influence and control. They start to influence people. So I think there's a precedent that's being set here. And that's aside from what's going to happen to the brothers in India. And I think that's a very important topic that we need to talk about, because here is a scary situation, because they're not going to hide. These people are very passionate about their belief, man. They fight the consequences and abuse of some Muslims when they call them to prayer. They'll be prepared to stand up for Islam. And we've seen it when the coronavirus hit in India, and they stood firm despite the persecution that they went through. So we know they're going to stand firm, and may Allah reward them for it, but may Allah also protect them for the consequences that are going to come.
Yeah, it's some really interesting points there, because the extremism and terrorism side, there have been, you'll be surprised, but even after September 11th, the US government, was paying a close eye to the Tablighi Jamaat. And there have been people in the past who have performed actions like a terrorist attack, or whatever you want to call it, who have been at some stage part of the Tabligh. But I think it's what you guys are saying is bang on, because even places like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, a lot of these places have banned them, not because of the threat of terrorism, is because the way they see a very fundamental type of Islam, where it's really back to the roots, literally, how you dress in a certain way, the way you interact with the women and so on. So, I remember, years ago when I was in a dawah field, and I'd come home and my dad would say, my dad doesn't know too much about Islam and stuff. So he'd ask, how many people have you converted today? So even without having too much information about what I was doing or what I was calling for, even our elders know that Islam is it needs to expand the people. It needs to bring people into the ummah, right? And that's why, like you're saying, it's not just the Tablighi Jamaat. Obviously, they also highlighted dawah groups, but they singled out Tablighi Jamaat, i.e. anyone who's calling for some sort of a change. And in reality, it's a good point you guys said there. Vision 2030 doesn't go in line with what Tablighi Jamaat stand for, right? So you can see how they're attacking them in that way. And that does make sense, the fact that, and also another important point, when they're saying they're like a conveyor belt, a lot of people that come off the street may originally come across Tablighi Jamaat.
Yeah.
Then they might get closer to Allah. Then they might come across someone who's speaking about Islam in a more comprehensive manner, about Khilafah, about, clashes of civilization and so on. So the way they see it is that, these people initially get the guise of drugs and of alcohol and stuff like that. And then it allows them to maybe, when they're a bit more intellectually hungry, when what Tabligh is doing isn't really satisfying them. Maybe they've done some more reading and they realize actually Islam is far more comprehensive than what these brothers are telling me. They then look elsewhere. Yeah. Okay. So that does make a lot of sense. Now, in regards to the India issue, and I'll come to you, JK, and you can make your point or you can respond to this as well. We saw that there's an issue. Obviously, we know in India there's the Hindutva, and actually you'll be surprised that there is a movement where they are saying basically that everyone in India was Hindu at one stage. And there are movements of saying bring people back. And I'll tell you something about Tablighi Jamaat as well, from what I was reading. When they came about when there were certain groups from within the Hindus who emerged around that time, who were actually converting Muslims and Christians back to Hinduism. and Muslims never had an answer. And then Tablighi Jamaat came on the scene, and they sort of combated that. So, like Afi was saying, we saw that how they got really, accused of spreading corona in India. This thing, the BJP have lashed onto it, okay, wanting to ban it. So the situation there is going to be far worse than in Saudi, because the presence really isn't that big in Saudi. So how is that going to play out? So JK, you're going to make a point anyway. You could do that.
Yeah, the only point I was going to make to something Afi was mentioning about, Tablighi Jamaat, they might not be political, but they are conservative traditionalist Muslims. So they do view Islam very conservatively. So
Fundamentalists.
Fundamental in that sense, yeah. So the way they dress, the way, even the brothers and the sisters, the way they dress, the way that the mosque is kind of the main element of their call, coming back to the mosque and praying in the mosque. So, I mean, there's positives there, definitely. But the bit that I find quite ironic in all of this is that the Tablighi Jamaat are not too dissimilar to the Salafists and the Wahhabi Muslims that Saudi, kind of was built on. They're very similar because they also are very conservative. Their women wear niqab. The niqab is very dominant in their society, like the Tablighi Jamaat as well. So it really shows that the fact that they're targeting Tablighi Jamaat is that Saudi itself wants to move away from conservative Islam. Yeah. They themselves want to move away from Wahhabi Islam as well. The regimes I'm talking about, the leadership, they want to move away from this brand of Wahhabi Salafi Islam as well, right? They don't want any of that. They want to move to a liberal, modern Islam, which is represented by all these events and Vision 2030 and women's rights and all of that. They want to move in that direction. So any sort of threat to that, whether it be conservative Islam or political Islam, they will lash out against, they will call out, because they don't want that. That was my point. And then to your point there, your question there about the BJP and let them latching onto this, it's no surprise because, the Tablighi Jamaat, they are most dominant in the Indian subcontinent. They came from the Indian subcontinent. So they are most prominent there. They probably have the most members in those lands, right? I have my local mosque is a Gujarati mosque, the Tablighi Jamaat mosque, basically. Most of the people, 99% of the people there.
I think the most influential in Bangladesh, from what I know.
Yeah, in Bangladesh is massive. Yeah, it's massive. So India, Bangladesh, that region is quite big for Tablighi Jamaat. So India, no wonder the regime, the BJP, they've come out and thought this is a great opportunity. If Saudi, a so-called representative of Islam, is calling out this group, we now have ammo to call it. They've now got a reason to call this group out. And not only this group, they can now up their kind of persecution of Muslims using.
But JK, just to add as well, just to add that, on what basis are they targeting them? The Saudis talked about Aqidah, Bid'ah, stuff like that. These are not latched purely on terrorism. Exactly. So they've chosen the most unlikely candidates, right, in the Muslim community. But so if the Tablighi Jamaat could be the corridors of terrorism, or whatever they called it,
terrorism,
right? What does that make any other Muslim?
Exactly. And we've had discussions about this before around the term terrorism, the term extremism. It's not the way we view it as terror and extreme it's not always, that's not the definition. The definition to them of terrorism and extremism is anyone who moves towards Islam, you are becoming extreme in your religion. You become radical in your religion. So anyone who moves towards Islam, which the Tablighi Jamaat basically trying to do, calling towards Islam, they view as a gate, a corridor towards what they call terrorism, but in fact it's Islam. They're moving towards Islam, which they cannot take. And that's why this Indian government, BJP government, VHP party and others, they are using this to say, look, if Saudi can say it, we can say it and we can target Muslims. And, a lot of Muslims are going to be killed, tortured, persecuted on the back of this.
Yeah. And from Saudi, there's a lot of hypocrisy here, because in one way, the way you can link Tablighi Jamaat, for example, it's not a strong link, very weak link, is the fact that they emanate from the Deobandis. And if you look at the Deobandis, they actually were, very active, certainly after the 1857 uprising, which ended with Delhi falling and the end of the Mughal Empire. They were very active in fighting the British. very active. You know, some of the guys who started off the Deoband school, they were actually fighters. They had been imprisoned and all sorts, right? So sometimes they can make this link, but you know what, though, if you think about it, Saudi Arabia, right, during the 80s and around that time, right, who was funding the Deobandis? Who was funding the madrasas in against to train and teach the people against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan? It was the Saudis. So when the Saudis are talking about gateways of extremism and terrorism, right, in fact they were funding the Deobandis and the madrasas in Pakistan to fight against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan for the benefit of America. And on top of that, in all honesty, when we talk about I mean, I don't want to use the word Wahhabism or Wahhabi because it is actually seen as a derogatory term, so I don't use it anymore. But just say it from the Salafi point of view, it's well known. It's actually well known that if you go back to the teachings of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and from that time, the Takfirism and all this, and what some people like Brother Haji, for example, Bro Haji, he argues that, ISIS and stuff like this are actually a direct product of the teachings of people like Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, right? In regards to Takfirism, killing Muslims, just doing takfir on people. So in reality, when you're talking about from an Aqidah point of view, there's more possibility of violence. And I don't want to use the word terrorism, violence, shall I say, from the Salafi point of view than it is from the Tablighi point of view, right? Now, moving on a little, we can see that, as I think JK mentioned it as well, that the Tablighi Jamaat, they are called out by other Muslims, and we've certainly done this. I've sat, when the brothers used to come around and you let them in, and I've sat with them and spoken to them about the issues of the world and the issues of Palestine and stuff like that, and they're just not interested. They just want you to go with them for 40 days, right? So you've seen this. So the Tablighi Jamaat are definitely called out by other Muslims for being non-political, right? Not dealing with the issues that concern the Ummah. And this is actually the reason why, and they say this themselves, that this is the reason why they've been able to grow and they've been welcomed and allowed to stay in countries in the East and West, right? However, we know Islam doesn't have a concept such as, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and render to God the things that are God's. Islam doesn't have this concept, okay? So one of my questions I'd like to discuss with you guys is, in reality, can you have an Islamic group, right? And we might have to explain what an Islamic group is. Can you have an Islamic group which is non-political? Afi, I'll ask you that question, bro.
Well, you can't influence change by being apolitical. I think that's the first point. I think it's a bit unfair, and I don't think you intended to say this, that they're not concerned with the affairs of the Muslims worldwide.
No, they get called out for that. They get called out.
They get called out for it. But I think, when you speak to them and the in-depth conversations I have, that they are all for the unity of the Muslims. And I think that, and that goes without saying. I think they're individual, and this is just from individuals, so I just got to assume that this is what they all stand for. They want the unity of the Muslims, but they just seem to think it's going to happen by magic once people become religious.
Bro, they want Khilafah. The way to get there is different.
That's it. And they think that it's just going to happen automatically. And so I think they're not political in the sense that they're not trying to activate or bring about political change. They just want to bring about the religious change, and they think that the political change will happen automatically. But I think here, just on this issue, I don't think, well, you can't get that change by the way they're doing it. But I think this poses another problem for them, which is, if you look at the other groups, and if you look at in the non-Muslim countries as a whole. They're trying to get the Muslims and they're trying to absorb them into society. They're trying to absorb them and make them part of the identity of that country. So adding in Islam, but with a bit of a nationalistic flavor to it, or patriotic flavor. So being a British Muslim, and then you get these Muslim councils of Britain come along. You've seen Pakistan is by default, because whoever comes into power, they get the main Brilvi person in charge, and they use them as their religious spokesperson. India has been calling out the Tablighi Jamaat for years. This isn't, for decades. I could go back 10, 15 years ago when they've been calling out for, we need to do something about this group, because if you look at it, they're looking outwardly. They're looking for anyone who's outside of their group to bring them in. So they go to other countries. So they don't have this concept of nationalism and trying to bring about their group in a country and then giving it a local identity. They haven't been able to separate that global identity for what they stand for. I think that is something which is distinct about them, whereas the other groups, for example, if you look at the Brilvi movement, for example, they don't have this international element to them. They have a local element to them, and they don't go about trying to create this external one. And that's why it's easy to bring them in and contain them within a non-Muslim country as well. Whereas the Tablighis, they don't have that.
Yeah, I mean, just to confirm, and it's good that you did that. That I'm not saying that they don't care about what's happening in the Ummah. It's just for them, there's other ways of trying to resolve these type of issues. But going back to the question, which I'll ask Rash, but I'll repeat the question: is the fact that we talk about Tablighi Jamaat. I actually want to move away from Tablighi Jamaat just for now, but let's use them as an example. Tablighi Jamaat themselves say they're not political. Okay. However, we've done podcasts before where we speak about Islam having a political aspect and so on. So what my question is that for a group to be deemed as an Islamic group, can it be non-political? Rash, what's your thoughts on that?
So it's a really good question, and I want to try and answer it by looking at kind of three different models, because you can compare them all, and Tablighi Jamaat fall into that one model quite conveniently, because if you think about it, there's almost three kind of methodologies or three kind of approaches. There's the one approach where you're kind of saying that the situation is so difficult that being political at all means you can't stay alive. Imagine like you need, energy, or you need oxygen or whatever to stay alive in an environment. If there's no oxygen, you die. So the Tablighi Jamaat almost approached it that way, where they're thinking we can't be, and again, I'm maybe giving them too much credit here, but hear me out a second. So it's almost like, if we be completely non-political, completely apolitical, and try and just work completely grassroots, then maybe we can prepare people sufficiently to instigate some type of a change. Okay, then you've got the Ikhwan Muslim Brotherhood type of model, which is, again, still wanting the success of the Ummah, still wanting Islam to be successful, but more political in that their end goal is more clearly defined as political and their pathway is political. In other words, get involved in the political system, even though the political system is of kufr and not Islam, get involved and gradually change it. But at the same time, before they get involved, and like we saw in Egypt, go through a process of doing grassroots, very similar to TJ, in that doing grassroots work, social work, bringing people together, helping the community, all of this kind of very grassroots local work, then build your affiliation with people. And then when you do call out for their leadership, even in a kufr system, they will vote for you so that you become political then more. And then you're in government, and then you gradually try and implement Islam, a little bit, 1%, 2%, 5% at a time, eventually leading to full Islam. We've actually seen, and this is another example talking about today, that both of these approaches, where one, TJ, no politics, two, Ikhwan, a little bit pragmatic type politics in an Islamic group, neither of them work. So if your question is does political groups work without Islam? Clearly from evidence, the answer is no. Do they have a role? I think is a slightly different question. So you could say, do they have a role in that, keeping people on the deen, keeping people's, people who are losing their deen, the aqidah, not understanding that, keeping those people on that conveyor belt, if you want to use the same analogy, then they do have a type of role. But for the actual change of the ummah, you need political groups that completely understand the political situation of the Muslims, and also recognize that Muslims need to be closer to their deen in order to want to work for anything more than what they have now. So I would answer the question as saying, for proper, practical, actual change, Islamic groups need to have a fully political dimension to them.
Okay. I mean, what you're saying there is that you give some examples of the extremes. And what I would say is that what my question was more leading towards the fact that, especially, if you got just say a group that's set up just to show people how to make ghusl of the deceased, that's what it does. That's the fine. When you're talking about an Islamic group, Islamic party, which is calling for change, for an Islamic change, then can that be non-political? Because Tablighi Jamaat isn't the only one, but they are certainly doing this, and there's many others.
But that's a good example that you gave, isn't it? You said that there's a group, say that someone sets up a group to teach a ghusl for the deceased. What if TJ say, well, we set ourselves up just to help Muslims stay on the deen and nothing more? So are we saying that, in the same way as the ghusl example is needed, what if they turn around and say, well, this is all we're doing. We're not trying to establish full Sharia. We're not trying to change the landscape of the Muslim Ummah. We're just making sure that people don't leave Islam.
Yeah, well, I'll let JK come in then, and if he doesn't answer that, I'll...
I'm looking at this slightly differently in all of this. So I think, from my perspective, for a group to be considered Islamic, and I know it sounds, I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to teach to suck eggs, but basically for a group to be Islamic, they need to understand Islam. So what I mean by that is, for any group, and whatever the objective may be, they need to understand what is the objective of Islam in itself. What was the objective of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? That's the way I would understand how a group needs to be. Because you could even say, someone could even argue, is it sufficient for a group just to be about politics? And I would say no, actually, because it's not just about politics. Islam is broader than just politics, but Islam is comprehensive. It includes political aspects, but also includes individual aspects for the building someone's character, to be, to understand what it means to be a Muslim in terms of the relationships with their parents and everything else that it entails, right? So I would go back to, in fact, if you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad ﷺ was the first person to set up a group, right, of the Sahaba. So this is our example. So what did this group do? What did it entail? And did it include politics? Did it not? That's the way I would view this question that you've asked, of whether an Islamic group needs to be political or not. And if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he wasn't just the best father, the best husband, the best, the best prophet, or the best leader in terms of their society, but he was also a politician. He was also a statesman. He was also a military general. He was all of these things, and he was the best in these things. And his group of Sahaba, when he had established them in Mecca for a certain purpose, they didn't view purely from we need to perfect ourselves, we need to come to the mosque. They understood the radical nature of Islam and what it required for Islam to become present in society holistically, comprehensively. And that's the way I would judge a group. Does the group view Islam in this comprehensive way, both from the smaller issues, the smaller level things, to the higher level societal change that we're looking for? So going back to your question as to whether any group, we're using TJ as an example, but any group to be considered an Islamic group and a successful Islamic group needs to ask this question of itself: that does it emulate the way the Messenger ﷺ set up the first group in Islam, which was the group that we all look to, the group of the Sahaba? That's how I would look at this question.
Yeah, no, exactly, and also if we look at the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding that, from the ummah, there needs to arise a group which invites to all that is good, khair, which is Islam, okay? And, which forbids the evil, which enjoins the good, and they are the successful ones. So from here, we can see just from this description that this fits, for example, what you talked about there about the Sahaba. Okay, so that if we can understand what is Islam, so we can see that if we are inviting people to Islam, then Islam in its entirety, from the Aqidah level, from everything, starts from the Aqidah. And just from the Aqidah itself, you would conclude that Islam deals with matters which are personal to the individual, between them and their creator, and also between how society manages itself and how the relationships are managed within society, just from the Aqidah. Okay, just the Bedouins, when they were asking the Messenger sallallahu, what is it you want? And he said, look, just give me one kalima. And they said, we'll give you 10. What is it? And he said, La ilaha illa Muhammad Rasulullah. But at that time, if you think about it, how many of the rules had been revealed? Probably, you could argue, probably none. Okay, or as a system of governance or anything like this. However, they understood that what this meant now is that all your matters have to refer back to Allah, and this isn't just your personal matters; it's to do with how society is managed as well. So that's why when I'm looking at various groups, and I'm looking at an Islamic group, and Rash makes a valid question, well, asks a valid question. If the Tablighi Jamaat, for example, said, we're not bothered in change as such, all we want to do is improve people's prayers and stuff like that, then to be honest with you, they're not calling towards Islam. They're calling towards an aspect. And even that aspect is so detached from the reality, because we know that even the 5 pillars have a political dimension to them as well. Whether it's Salah, whether it's Aqidah, whether it's Hajj, all of these, right? So that's why I wanted to sort of get your views on that. Yes, Rash.
Just want to add, I think it's probably for another podcast, to be fair, but I think we just got to be a little bit careful on this matter, because the whole idea of the methodology, of how a group, how it should work, its objective, what it's trying to achieve, these are things that fall into ijtihad. So, that this idea that, a group might, for example, TJ might say, look, we're looking at the early part of the Meccan phase. We're looking purely at the bit where we're just trying to prepare people. It was very apolitical at that point. We know Islam is political, and it was there to implement the systems of Islam from Medina onwards.
But Rash, that's what I'm not pinpointing Tablighi Jamaat here. I'm not.
No,
what I'm saying is that even from day one, just the Shahada had a political dimension to it. You cannot say that we are non-political.
Absolutely agree. So I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that, again, because the whole idea of, going through a methodology to work towards something political, it requires ijtihad to understand that methodology, doesn't it? Even the methodology of deriving something from the seerah to say this is how we now in our current reality work towards actual change, there's an element of ijtihad there. So all I'm saying is it's a larger topic to discuss and talk about. They might have done it, maybe whether they've done ijtihad or not, I don't know, but they might say, look, we're working on the specific aspect of the seerah. And again, correct me if any of you think otherwise, by the way. So they may be looking at it purely in a more narrow vision and going, look, the Prophet in Mecca, purely, there was no Islam being implemented, same as today. There's no Islam being implemented on the earth. A lot of Muslims are moving away from the correct understanding of Islam. In that time, there were a lot of Muslims that needed to first understand Islam. They might put themselves in that bracket and go, we're doing that bit. You're right, though. I agree completely. If you don't have the objective to do what the Prophet ﷺ did, and the fact that we have the rest of the seerah after that now, whereas they didn't, it was still to play out in history. But again, someone could argue and someone could try and put forward, oh no, we're just working on this element. And that's why I think that's a larger, wider discussion potentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I'm 100% with you there. The only thing that I'm trying to establish here is that, and it's not just about them, it's just the fact that you cannot be non-political as such and be an Islamic group and claim you're non-political. Why? Because Islam itself has a political aspect. That's just what I'm trying to say, because you're right, there could be some group that's just working on a certain aspect, right? However, it doesn't claim to be non-political. It just understands that today people are far away from this particular thing. Let's build this thing and we'll reach somewhere else. When a group, and this particular example is Tablighi Jamaat, could be many others, when they say we are non-political, what I'm trying to say is that Islamically, that doesn't make sense. That there's a contradiction there.
I mean, do you know what's problematic as well? So this hypothetical view that you can say a group says, oh, we're working on this aspect only, like you said, the funeral thing, right? They might be saying we're just working on this. And do you know what? I don't want to belittle some of the actions of groups. So many groups, these groups in TJ, they've created many mosques in a whole of in Western lands. They've helped a lot of Muslims even probably come to the deen, right? I'm not belittling any of that. May Allah reward them for that action. You know, that is with them and Allah, what they've done. I'm not trying to belittle that, right? But I think where it becomes problematic, right, is when you have discussions with them, and I've had many discussions with groups that affiliate with people that affiliate with Tablighi Jamaat, they will say, they will view Islam in this way, right? So they don't view it as, oh, we're just looking at this. We're leaving the rest for other groups or other people, right? They, in fact, view the whole of Islam as this is the way for Islam to rise. And actually, do they really look for the rise of Islam? I'm not sure they do, to be fair. I know we said that they want, they would want an Islamic unity and authority, but the way I have come across Muslims here, and maybe because they don't understand the whole objective, and probably because the dawah has reduced them to this, they're quite comfortable in these lands. As long as they have their mosque, they can pray, they've got these avenues, that's fine. They don't need anything else. They're not looking for anything else. So do you see how it's problematic now? So if now everyone goes there and we join, say we join and we come to Islam, come to the mosque, alhamdulillah, we've done that. If it stops there, isn't that very problematic?
Just give me a quick example there, JK. Quick example. Yeah, they say estimated 400 million followers. Imagine if there's 400 million followers working for the comprehensive change of the situation.
And this is my point, because I've actually had some frustration in my da'wah when I'm speaking to Muslims that have this view, because they don't even see the problem. They view it as okay. We're okay in our status quo. We're okay living here amongst, as long as they're okay with us, and as long as we, in fact, they've actually integrated within society. And that is problematic, because we're not, we have a situation now where Islam is not being implemented. We are not fulfilling our obligations, the Sharia in its entirety. So there should be a problem. There should be some agitation there. But if there's no agitation, nothing there, that's where I understand where the points are coming from. But in reality, I'm talking about the reality and the discussions I've had, this is where the problem arises. You need politics. You need to understand that Islam is politics. And when we say politics, it's about looking after the affairs of the people, not your politics that you have in Western society that is corrupt and not really politics in its true nature. That's the way I would view, I understand where you're coming from, Maj, in terms of, if you don't view Islam as political, then you've misunderstood of what Islam is in its nature.
I think,
figure for it.
No, I was just going to say, I think when we're looking at groups like the Tablighi Jamaat or whatever group, because I think there's a danger that the conversation could sound like it's a bit Tablighi Jamaat bashing, which it's totally
not.
Isn't.
Yeah, it's not.
Totally isn't. And I think, sometimes people could get a bit too caught up in, definitions and certain terms to use. So they may say we are not political because they view being political as being a parliamentary system, and therefore we're vying for that parliamentary position, and therefore we're going to take local elections and we're going to get involved in that, and therefore make a place for us on the National Assembly. They're not about that. However, when you look at them and look at it in detail, and this is not just with them, it's with a lot of Muslims who claim to be, we're not into politics, their actions will have a political element because it impacts on their relationship with other people and how should we be transacting with each other and how should this transaction be governed. So, they are looking for some actions that they do will have a political element, maybe not necessarily fit into the definition of the way they perceive politics. And I think here is where the problem with groups, all Muslim groups, is highlighted, because they know that that Islam governs the relationships that they have with other people. And in order for these to be carried out properly, there needs to be some rules in place. And they may apply rules on a local level, which kind of like bypass that, but they know in order for this to be done properly, this has to be part of law, right? And therefore, and this is with a lot of Muslims, and even in the Muslim countries, you see them pushing for certain laws to come into place. The problem, and I think coming back to why the Tablighi Jamaat, before, I don't know, Majid, if you were going to say something, just want to touch on something that Rash was
Go for it.
There's something that Rash was talking about. I think the real problem will come by the reaction of the Tablighi Jamaat, because this is global now. This is highlighted in the media. Everyone is talking about Tablighi Jamaat being banned. Again, let's not focus on the what bit. It's what's going to happen. Are they going to stand firm? Or is there a danger that they focus on this political aspect, the terminology like we've talked about, which then sets a very dangerous trend, because inadvertently it could cause this mentality of dividing Islam from politics, as the way we've discussed it here.
And that's happened already, because some of the spokespeople of TJ, they've come out on the defensive. We're not about terrorism, nothing that you can't link anything that we do with terrorism. None of the people who have been involved in terrorist acts in recent times or in any time can be linked back to us. So they've gone immediately on the defensive. And the worry about that is if they're on the defensive, they've already gone into protection mode. How do we protect our organization now that we're under threat, even in the Asian subcontinent, but also in the Muslim lands?
And they may be surprised themselves about why they're being targeted. Like
exactly. So rather than actually try and expose the Saudis, it should have been on the offensive. Like, look, who are you?
Actually, sorry, just interrupt you. I don't know, Asham made note of this. I don't know who it was, but it was a high-ranking person within the Tablighi Jamaat. They basically came and said that the Saudis want to separate Riyadh from the rest of the Muslim world.
Okay. So it'd be good to find that source, because that's something worth discussing. I hadn't
basically what he was saying is that this attack is like an attack on Islam, and maybe he can see what they're trying to do in Saudi. And they're trying to disconnect Riyadh from the rest of the Muslim world so they can do what they want to do.
Yeah, and that's the approach they need to take, because they need to go on the offensive. They need to say that, look, who are you to speak about Islam when the things that you're doing, or look at your history, look at what you're doing in terms of this Vision 2030, look at all these concerts that you're having, look at what you're doing to the Muslim lands, all of those things, you're bombing our Muslim brothers and sisters. Come out on the offensive and say, this is what you guys are, and you guys are trying to put the claim of terrorism on us. You guys have more influence in terrorism with the likes of ISIS than anybody else, and you're trying. If they come out on the offensive, then other Muslims will be like, look, they actually gain some credibility from it. But the worry is they've gone on the. Again, maybe there is other examples. I've only read a couple.
I think maybe it's like not really like centralized as such, and maybe you've got different types of guys. Or
I think that is the case. That is the case,
because this guy was like, he was saying it straight. He goes, look, Saudis, they're doing this. This is a game. That's how he said it. He goes, this is a game. And I think also another thing which is important to understand, and I think Afi made a good point in regards to the political side. Obviously, we understand the political aspect of Islam in the sense like it's look after the affairs of the people, right? However, I was reading this other article where it was talking about that this latest move by Saudi is to even further make a disconnection between politics and Islam and religion. They said the religion, obviously they meant Islam, right? So I think it's come to a stage where this notion of living in a certain way, whether they want to say a 7th century or whatever, this notion of, your your social matters, your matters to do with the women, men and women, and have to be dictated by the rulings of Islam, which of Tablighi Jamaat will definitely refer back to in those personal matters. It's just maybe the issue to do with the relationship between them and the rulers is where they're not really too interested in, or they don't really cover, right? But certainly in issues to do with how women dress and stuff like that, there's obviously they still very active in regards to that. However, what we're seeing is over the past 10 years or so, there has definitely been an emphasis on maybe in the past where the Americans, for example, they used to promote Turkey as being the Turkish model for Muslim countries, where you can have a secular country, secular constitution and so on. However, you could still have maybe a leader who's seen as religious, like Erdogan, for example, his wife covers and whatnot, right? What we see is since then is a move where basically any group, no matter who they are, any government that is somehow linked to even the notion of Islam, even if it's gradualism, because even with gradualism, the desire is that one day, right, we will get there. Okay, we may go different routes and not the right route, but the desire is that one day we will live under Islam and the Sharia and the Khilafah and whatever, right? So it's like they're trying to kill this idea. They kill it, that Islam has anything to do with politics. They're trying to kill it. So here, this latest attack from what this article was saying was that this further shows that what they're trying to do is they're trying to even remove any group that talks about in society you need to deal with people in this particular way, even though it's very disconnected. And even I don't use the word secular, but can't think of another word. But in regards to how the Tablighs go about, it is very much what JK said. They're not really their way of life or their method doesn't really even entertain the bigger picture. It just doesn't, and that's just a fact. Okay, and you can see why. Then they are able to thrive in certain communities because of that fact. And if we're going to look at politics, and one of the reasons why I brought this question about politics and Islamic groups being political by nature, and also how does politics play a role in Islam, we know this, we've done podcasts before, is the fact that if we look at the life of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we always need to refer back to the revelation, and we look at the life of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we see that there was a difference in the approach and the reaction of the pagans of Quraysh from when the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, from when they thought he was just doing preaching as an individual, to when he came out in a collective manner, in an organized manner, and was targeting change in society. There was a big difference. So you can see why when you have a group which is political and calling for a comprehensive change, they will be resisted. Other groups, you see Tablighi Jamaat, they won't. However, what we can see then is maybe, brothers, times are changing. Maybe now, even that is not going to be acceptable, that you have people that are even calling Muslims to their morals and akhlaq and these type of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think you got to realize that. It comes back down to something that you said earlier on, Maj. I think it's anything which gives potential for revival is going to be a problem. And, the Tablighi Jamaat here isn't the objective. I think they're just a means to an objective, which is ultimately ensuring that secularization of Muslims. And,
it reminds me of that, the hadith of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The knots of Islam will be done one by one, possibly the ruling, then the salah. If you think about what the Tabligh Jamaat call to, they call to salah, they call to prayer. And they don't call to ruling, really. They don't call to politics.
No.
But when you see the path that the enemies are going down and the agents are going down, the ruling is, obviously they don't want the ruling. This was far, far ago they would call this out. But they're also targeting the salah in the sense of they're targeting anyone who calls towards any aspect of Islam. And that's why I'm not that surprised with them calling out Tabligh Jamaat, because the direction they're going in is it's not about just politics. Any direction towards Islam, they're against, because
I would say sorry, JK, I would say they highlighted dawah groups.
Exactly. Yeah. They did.
You know what they want to do is they want to monopolize the reformation of Islam. So in Saudi, like their own movements, the Madkhali movement, the Salafi Madkhalis, the fact that they were the ones still being able to preach that or continue to preach this mode of obeying the rulers regardless of what the rulers say, a certain type of reformation. It's a certain type of, well, it's not Islam, but it's a certain way to call to something, this foreign liberal modern Islam. And what they want to do is they want to monopolize that. And they see the likes of Tablighi Jamaat and other dawah groups, as they've highlighted, not just them. And the thing you said right at the beginning, Majid, about the fact that, apparently the Tablighi Jamaat have been banned there for 30 plus years anyway. This is one strand or one particular brand that they're trying to highlight in this instance. And that highlights also that what they want to do is make sure their version of Islam is the only version that's being propagated. And that actually fits in with Vision 2030, doesn't it? Because if your version is the only version that's on the ground, all these hundreds of thousands of people who are going to these concerts, clearly those people are young people who have bought into that version of Islam, which allows you to do these things because the rulers have put them in place. You can still go and pray, but you can still go and do these kind of things. You can still fully integrate with the Western way of life. And that's the version of Islam. They want to monopolize that and make sure there's no one else on the grassroots level or any level promoting anything else.
Yeah. That, even if it's just their internal population.
Yeah,
exactly.
And Raj, just on that point, we know that Saudi Arabia, or bin Shaitan and his father, the path they're trying to go down. And what better way of doing it rather than exposing yourselves by bringing in the rules and making everyone attack you? Use groups like this to start planting messages so that you start planting those seeds that then you can build upon without exposing yourselves, but make other groups the focus.
Yeah. So what if they go to the Tablighi Jamaat and say, look, no, the only way you're going to survive in our land is when you promote these messages within your dawah as well. We don't know. If they go on the defensive, they might be willing to take on board some of that. Inshallah they don't, but who knows?
I think the way to look at it, I don't think they will. They got a tradition of they haven't changed since 1926, right? What I would say though is, check this out. Just say they have been banned for 30, 40 years. That's understandable because obviously we've all been to Saudi. We know it's just their way or the highway, right? Also, think about this. In the past, people like Sheikh bin Baz, Rahimahullah, and all these other previous scholars, they've clearly in the past have said these guys are deviated, their aqidah is deviated and all sorts. You got to think about timing. Why now? And I think that's the key. Why now? And it goes back to what JK was saying earlier and what you guys touched on. Vision 2030, right? And what Afi was just saying now, you want to push these things through, let's just do it through these people, right? Demonize them, which actually would demonize other people, or even people with similar ideas within the population might just say, actually, you know what? If we speak out, next we'll be on a banana boat out of Saudi as well. So I think that's what it comes down to. It comes down to the timing. And now we can see why they're doing this move now, where it was before in the past. Because remember, the message was more to do with, not that we're banning them, it was more that you need to be careful of these. Either the Tablighi Jamaat have become very active in Saudi Arabia, and I highly doubt that, because I was just watching the Haram Sharif on TV, and there's hardly anyone there. So right now, definitely Tablighi Jamaat not traveling to Saudi Arabia, right? So they're going to be small in number anyway. So you got to think about timing, and I think it fits in. They're just being used once. They're the first, and there are many are going to follow.
And look what they've done. They were, look at that the tweet that was put out. What have they instructed? They've instructed every imam to talk about this on the Jummah khutbah.
In the country.
In the country. So we know that they control every mosque and they give them the khutbah to read out. So every mosque, every Muslim is going to be exposed to this message within Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, inshallah, what I want to do is is get your sort of final thoughts if you have any, because you know what, you guys have, and to be honest with you, the way I was seeing this from the beginning, from the start of the podcast to now, to me, it's making a lot more sense. And from what you guys have added, it, you know, I'm sure, hopefully the listeners and those watching will sort of like add the dots together as well. So it's been very beneficial for me. But inshallah, if you guys have any final thoughts, you know, I'll start with you, Rush. If you want anything you want to add at the end.
Just a very short one. I think just as an advice to myself and to Muslims is that when these kind of events happen, don't disconnect them from the other things that are going on as well. And then that will help you. Just as you said there, the fact that Vision 2030 is happening, the fact that they've done this, the fact that it's in, you know, all of the Jummah khutbah, you can see it's part of a plan. These things don't happen by coincidence. So as a Muslim, we should be politically clued up. We should look at the other events that are occurring. You can actually link it to UAE as well. You know, last week when we were talking about all of the changes in those rules for their 50 years, there's definitely synergies to do with how they want Muslims to live and the more Western way of living infiltrating our Muslim lands. So, you know, for Muslims, what we should be doing is look at all of the events and see how they're interconnected. And I think that will help us be more aware of, you know, of the plans against ourselves and our ummah.
And just to add to that point, is a prerequisite for that is to be aware, of what's happening. Only then can you even attempt to join dots. JK, bro?
Yeah, just to build on what Rasha said there, actually, Saudi is going down this path, and they're following the other Gulf nations, such as the UAE, in both terms of liberalization, westernization of the blessed land, but also other activities such as normalization with the Zionist entity. You know, you had Abdullah al-Mulimmi, the Saudi's permanent representative at the UN. He said in an interview with Arab News, he recently said that Riyadh is ready to normalize relations with Israel based on the Arab Initiative to Peace, which was signed in 2002. So they're going down this action in terms of following the UAE. The UAE have already basically adopted immorality, corruption in their land. But why does it matter more here? The reason it matters more here is that there's a massive difference. The Saudi land is viewed as an Islamic land. They are supposedly the custodians of the two holy mosques, right? So them taking this action carries greater weight than the UAE or Dubai doing something, right? Dubai has been a safe haven for Westerners for years, right? But the Saudi regime doing it carries immense weight, right? Because the world will look at this as the representatives of the Muslims have taken this action. And other Muslim nations will look to this, right? This normalization that they're talking about, if they do it, all the countries of the OIC can now do it, because the 56 nations will say the Saudi regime who lead the OIC have normalized ties. That gives us free rein to now normalize ties with the occupying entity, right? So we need to look at this very clearly, and we should also refer back to history, right? The land of the Haram was once Tawheed in terms of the time of Ismail, right? It was Tawheed. He established Tawheed there, right? And then it became a land of shirk because one man, Amr ibn Amr al-Khuzai, he brought in shirk, right? The idol worship. What happened as a result? It wasn't just him. The people then followed him of that land. Then the surrounding lands of the Hijaz, they saw, if Al-Haram, if the custodians of the Holy Mosque is doing this action, we can also do this action. They built their own idols, and that's how shirk spread. That's how the land of Tawheed became the land of shirk. And now, if Saudi, the land who, yes, many people may not look at it as an Islamic land, but they're still the land of, they still represent the blessed land. If they do this action, every other nation will look to it as, if they can modernize Islam, if they can liberalize Islam, we can also do the same. And that's why it carries such weight in them taking an action, and why we must, like Rash said, be aware of it, warn against it, and expose any of these plans that are happening, because we're at risk. Islam is at risk. Islam is under attack. So that's kind of my final message to take away from today.
Scary thoughts, bro. Scary thoughts. Brother Afi, talk to me.
I think for me, this is a wake-up call for every Muslim out there who's watching, listening, or going to talk about this with other Muslims. You know, for all those people who thought the persecution of Islam or the war on Islam is not going to reach my doorstep, I'm protected, or I'm relatively safe where I am. I think this shows that actually the Tablighi Jamaat, one of the most peaceful group of people you're ever going to come across, humble, polite, lovely brothers, man, and they're being picked on here for simply being Muslim. So it's only a matter of time before it's going to reach every single one of us, no matter where we are in the world, no matter what background, what group we're affiliated to, what school of thought we're affiliated to. This is going to impact us, and it's going to be real. And the only way to protect it is to stop sitting back and just like ignoring it. As Muslims, wherever we are, we need to unite and stand up against the tyranny and the persecution of our brother and sister, and not pass it off like, I'm safe where I am. I feel sorry for my brothers over there. I'll send some money. I'll pray. I'll do a car wash or whatever. This is getting real, and I think I want people to understand how this action is making it real. And just something else that Rash touched on earlier on about, you know, what the Tablighi Jamaat should do. All it takes is for the Tablighi Jamaat, if there's any brothers from the Jamaat who are listening or going to watch this, stand up, expose Saudi Arabia, and the Muslim world will be behind you, because they can see what's going on. They just need someone to stand up as their voice, and you will have the support.
Brilliant. Yeah, man. I felt like doing a takbir there, but I'm not going to. Rash, I think you wanted to make a quick point. I just fixes you, bro. I'll give the opportunity.
No. I would just like,
okay.
yes.
No worries, man. So yeah, that's some fantastic points and really good message for everyone listening as well. The only thing I would say really is the fact that as Muslims, when you have the two probably most despicable groups, shall I say, I'm not going to say people as such because they're not generalizing, but certainly groups, and you've got the BJP and you've got the Zionist entity in the occupied lands of Palestine. When you got them who are celebrating what Saudi are doing, wake up, man, wake up. How long are we going to keep making excuses for these people, for these rulers? You know, as Muslims, we need to have more about us. We need to have honor. And if we see that Muslims are being banned, targeted, whatever, and the kuffar are rejoicing over it, come on, you know what I mean? Whose side are you going to be on? So that's really the only thing I want to finish with, guys. Inshallah, Jazakallah khair once again for joining. It was great having Brother JK back as well. And obviously, Rash and Afi become regulars on the show. And it's really brilliant having you guys on, sharing your thoughts. And for all those listening and watching, as you know, the Islamic Vice podcast is available on all popular podcast platforms and also on my YouTube channel, Path to Revival. So inshallah ta'ala, if you find this beneficial, definitely share it with your family and friends. It's very important. We need to get the message out, and let's try to change from just being the audience into those who are part of the play. On that note, brothers, inshallah ta'ala, I will see you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu alaikum
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.